may, can we start with this, this bill to protect the NHS from trade deals? We understand your concerns for the NHS, but the Prime Minister has said on a number of occasions the NHS isn't up for sale. We've heard Donald Trump saying the NHS is not on the table. Why don't you believe them?
Well, we don't trust Boris Johnson, but the simple fact of the matter is that Donald Trump has told us that he wants to make sure that higher prices are paid for medicines by foreign countries and foreign governments. It's an instruction that he's given to his health secretary, and we have to be clear that there is a risk to services, that there's a risk to procurement in the NHS. We could end up in a situation that US corporations are given access to our NHS, and of course we would all end up paying a price for that. So what we simply want to see is a bill that comes in front of Parliament, that then becomes an act of law, that stops the NHS being interfered with by any trade deal that may take place. And we want to see that the devolved administrations in Edinburgh and Cardiff and Belfast have the opportunity to block anything that would be a threat to our NHS, something which is so critical to all of us, something that we revere as a public service that was celebrated for 70 years. Let's give it the protection that we can't end up in a situation where Donald Trump and Boris Johnson or anyone else bargains away our rights.
One of the concerns about NHS leaders is this politicising of and weaponising of the NHS itself. As you rightly say, it's something we're all very proud of and want to protect because it is an incredible service that we get. But by all the politicians standing there and using it in this way, it does bring all sorts of concerns for NHS leaders. Carrie McEwen, who's from the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges, says the NHS's role is to manage the health of the nation, not to be used to swing voters in a three-way marginal. Our fear in these febrile times is we will see irrational, undeliverable promises or even outright lies. There is a real fear that this is impacting on the NHS frontline workers, isn't it? By this constant undermining of where the NHS is and where potentially you can see it trying to go.
All of us have got a duty to make sure that the NHS is looked after and we stand up for our wonderful professionals in the health service. But the fact remains, Ben, that the British Medical Association told us about those risks last year. They are very concerned about what could happen if the price of medicines increases as a result of a trade deal with the US. We end up in a situation that US investors are given protected rights to go after the services of the NHS. What we're seeking to do is to make sure all those health professionals, all of us that benefit from the great service that we get from NHS professionals, that we're fully protected. And that's what this bill is about. It's not about weaponising, it's not about interfering with the health service, it's about making sure that an institution that we all love so dearly is given the protection that it needs in law to stop anybody interfering with the National Health Service. And I would appeal to parliamentarians across the House to get behind our bill, a bill which is in absolutely everyone's interest.
Why don't you trust Boris Johnson on the NHS? For a big chunk of its existence, Conservative governments have been in charge of it. He says he's not going to do trade deals with the US over it. Do you just think he's a liar?
Well, the proof of the pudding's in the eating, and NHS services in England have been privatised under the Conservatives. And I think when it comes to Boris Johnson, look, I have to say the man has got form. He's actually been sacked from 2 jobs because of lying.
So you in Scotland voted primarily to remain, 62%, which does mean a big chunk also voted to leave. Your party has said that you would push for a second Scottish independence referendum. That, again, we understand it's looking about 50-50 at best, one way or another. So there's another potential division. Why do you want to push for more votes that could cause more division in this situation?
Well, we don't want to create division, Kate. What we want to do is to bring Scotland together. But the starting point for this is the referendum that we had in 2014 on independence. And in that vote, we were told that if we stayed in the UK, that we'd be staying in Europe. Our rights as EU citizens would be protected. And the simple fact is that if Boris Johnson gets his way, that we're going to be leaving the European Union, and we are worried about the economic impact of that, the impact on jobs, on our communities, the social and the cultural aspect of being taken out of Europe as well. And I simply think it's right under those circumstances that, given that the SNP, the Scottish Government, has a mandate that we won by winning our election in 2016 to the Scottish Parliament, that the people of Scotland have got a right to say on their future. And in that debate on Scottish independence, and of course others are entitled to their views on that, we want to make sure that we're concentrating on the vision and the values that we have, how we make sure that Scotland is a prosperous country, how it's a fairer country, how we take responsibility for climate change, but to do that in a way that brings people together, to learn the lessons from the divisions that there are there on Brexit. Is about showing leadership, and I'm convinced that one, we will have that referendum, and I fully expect the people of Scotland to recognise that it will be in our best interest to become an independent country within Europe, to make Scotland a destination. But I want to unite the people of Scotland.
And if it doesn't, would you respect that? Because there's an argument, isn't there? The SNP is a party that kind of picks and chooses which democratic votes it goes along with. You mentioned where you've done well there, but of course you did lose the last Scottish independence vote, and you've come back and want more. Will you just keep going till you get what you want? Because that's what people accuse those over the Brexit referendum, don't they? That people just want to keep rerunning it until they get what they want. Whereas the nation, ordinary people, want to move on.
We need trust in politics, Kate. I think that's absolutely right. And of course, we have to respect democracy. All of us should do that. But the fundamental point is that we were told that in our referendum that if we stayed in the UK, we were staying in Europe. That was a lie. So it's on the basis of that fundamental change. And let's not forget that the SNP's won every election over the last few years in Scotland. We won the last 3 elections to the Scottish Parliament. And we did that on a manifesto commitment. If people supported us, then they had the right to have that say in the future. They have the right to have the referendum. That's democracy. Of course, we respect the result of the European referendum result. But the fact is that, as you said yourselves, that 62% of those in Scotland voted to remain. Our rights to stay in Europe should be respected by Westminster.
In order to get this second referendum on independence in Scotland, it needs to go through Westminster. That needs to be allowed via the government here in England. With that in mind, we know that Jeremy Corbyn and Labour haven't ruled out the idea of giving you that second independence referendum. Does that mean that you would potentially be supporting Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister, maybe looking to do a deal with them if it ever came to the point where they were looking for some help to get across the line?
First and foremost, what we're looking to do is increase support for the SNP in this election and increase upon the 35 of the 59 seats that we have in Scotland. We want a very clear message to go to Westminster that Scotland has the right to choose. And I would say to anybody, whether it's Boris Johnson, whether it's Jeremy Corbyn, whether it's anybody else, don't disrespect the votes of the people of Scotland. Respect the fact that the government in Edinburgh has a mandate. Respect the fact that the Scottish Parliament has voted for independence, and nobody, Jeremy or Boris,
but if you could help, if you could come into a relationship with Labour and help Jeremy Corbyn to become Prime Minister, would that help come along with the fact that you would be granted a second independence referendum?
It's not about helping anybody into 10 Downing Street, and of course we simply don't want Boris Johnson to be Prime Minister and that threat of us leaving Europe. We will support progressive politics, but the simple fact is anybody, Jeremy, Boris or anyone else, must respect Scotland and must respect the votes of the Scottish people in demanding that we have a right to determine our future. That is the key priority for us in this election campaign.
I'm not sure that's it, whether that's a yes or a no. Would you consider a deal with Jeremy Corbyn or not?
Well, we have said before, we said in 2015, 2017, repeat it again today, that we will not be going into a coalition with anyone. We will make sure that we deliver on the priorities for the people of Scotland. We want to see an end to austerity, the fact that so many of our people have suffered as a consequence of austerity. So we will do the right thing in making sure that we can influence government policy to that extent. But the key determinant, the key ask that we have is that we have that independence referendum, that the mandate that we have already is enforced.
Of course, and you can ask for that, but in order to get it, you have to have that influence of Westminster, and you can only have a maximum of 59 MPs. So who would you do a deal with to get that through? Would it be Jeremy Corbyn?
I've already said that we will not go into coalition with anybody.
No, not coalition, but some kind of supply and demand deal, some kind of, you know, confidence and supply deal, something that would make it work for you.
We will look at things on a case-by-case basis. We want to see investment in our communities. We want an end to austerity. Of course, we will support those kind of policy initiatives. But at the end of the day, we will do what is right for the people of Scotland. It's not about backing either Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn.
In 2017, you did well in that election, but you did lose 500,000 votes. And I think the SNP Deputy First Minister at the time, John Swinney, said he conceded the prospect of another independence vote was a significant motivator. And that was a point that he had to be attentive with, because that on the horizon felt like there was a bit of a shift north of the border, and the SNP lost a fair few seats, didn't they? Is that something that you're all keeping an eye on, just with regards to this vote and the fact that you're pushing so hard for another independence referendum?
I'm getting people up and down my own constituency and right throughout Scotland are saying to us that they want that right to choose, and this is about making sure that the people of Scotland have got that opportunity. That is front and centre of our campaign, and I'm appealing to everyone in Scotland to get behind that. And, you know, when you look at the opinion polls, and whether you're looking at people in Scotland or indeed throughout the rest of the United Kingdom, they do recognise the right of the people of Scotland to choose that future. So I'm going into this election with a degree of confidence. I believe that we will improve on the 35 seats. But, Ben, I would say to you, any party in the UK would love to be in the situation that we're in, that we've won every election to Scotland over the course of the last few years. And even with that result in 2017 that you're referring to, we still won 35 out of the 59 seats. No government in London has had such a mandate from the people of the UK over the course of the last few years. This is a very popular SNP government, one that's been in power now in Holyrood since 2007, and I'm looking forward to getting the backing of the people of Scotland again in this election campaign.
OK, and looking at your position on Brexit and wanting Scotland to remain within the EU, how do you know the EU is going to allow that, even if you could make it work? Who have you spoken to, and what kind of deal would that look like?
Well, of course, we are still in the European Union, and whatever happens, we're going to be in transition over the course of at least 2020. So we do that from a position that we're already there. I can say to you that in my own part, I've had many conversations with EU officials, with EU ambassadors. Our government in Scotland have had the same. That hand of friendship has been extended to the people of Scotland. It's been made very clear that the European Union does have a preference to make sure that the people in Scotland have got that right to remain as EU citizens. We will be an independent country. I will make that as a prediction, and we will be a member of the European Union.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. That's the SNP's Westminster leader, Ian Blackford.